All right. Now, actually, one thing I wanted to mention, there's early voting in Canada. And apparently they're asking, Robert, you'll tell me what you think of this. It's going to lead into our first discussion. They're asking for the telephone numbers and names of people showing up to vote in case there's an outbreak or in case of for contact tracing. And people are rightly freaking out. Yeah. And I'm saying, like, what do they even need your number for? They have your address on the back. They know exactly who showed up there. It's just another way to make you nervous, to make you scared, to intimidate you when you show up to vote. Nuts.
Yeah, well, it's a good way of it's helping Trudeau, I presume, because it's a way of saying, hey, the scary virus is out there, so you better vote for the guy who's as terrified of the virus as you are.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, though, ordinarily that would be the case. I think people now are getting really pissed off because they think that some of them are terrified, and they're saying, if this is so dangerous that I need to give my number, why did this nincompoop call an election at this point? He did it for political purposes. He's gonna eat some crow for this because there's gonna be some political backlash. But Robert, look, we got to do the number one subject of the week, the vaccine mandate. And I mean, I guess everybody knows about it at this point. Gruler did a great analysis, and Gruler pulled up some great stuff about the hypocrisy, the overt speaking out of both sides of your mouth, depending on the month, of this administration. Months ago saying we don't have the authority to do a federal vaccine mandate. We're not going to do it. It's a state issue. It's an individual employer issue. Every level of the Biden administration, as early as his presidency started, basically saying that. And in as much as Trudeau at one point said, we're not a country that makes vaccines mandatory, 6 months later, I believe vaccines should be mandatory for air and train. Biden administration comes out with it. And the tool that they use to enforce it is the OSHA, the Occupational Safety Hazard. What is it again? I get mixed up every time.
Yeah, it's about safety and health of workers.
So they create this mandate, which basically says any employer with over 100 workers, they have to be vaccinated. OSHA is going to enforce it, and it doesn't seem like many people think that this is constitutional, including Jonathan Turley, who everyone knows was the expert during the impeachment, a leftist lawyer if there's ever been one, not on the side of this time around. I mean, I guess, so if I'm missing any details, explain how that works. The federal government comes in now and says, we're issuing this mandate. Who gave it to us? We don't know. What's our authority? We don't know. And we're going to empower an administrative agency to enforce it. Elaborate, how does that work, and what do people make of that?
So effectively, there have been orders for the coronavirus task force to issue the actual orders. So we don't have the actual vaccine mandate rules yet. And it appears there's going to be 3 different ones issued. One to OSHA, for OSHA to issue an order to all employers with more than 100 employees. A second one issued to all federal employees. And a third one issued to all federal contractors. The ones involving federal employees and federal contractors, under federal law, the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act requires that religious accommodations be granted to any federal employee, including religious accommodations to a vaccine mandate. Anytime that's been litigated, the religious accommodation seeker has been vindicated and won in court, including to the prior flu vaccine mandate that applied to some limited hospital workers. So and Biden acknowledged that certain exceptions would have to apply for medical, disability, and religious reasons. That's because of the laws that govern and limit the federal government. Whether that will apply to the OSHA mandate is yet to be seen. It most likely will. There was always the Title VII argument for religious accommodation rights under Title VII, but the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act can be even stronger than Title VII, and since this is now a federal mandate, presumably it too would apply. To a certain extent, the OSHA rule is actually a testing mandate with a vaccine exemption. So what it is everybody has to be tested once a week unless they're vaccinated, and then they don't have to be tested. And the assumption is a lot of employers will try to forego the cost of weekly testing by mandating a vaccine in lieu thereof. That's how they're trying to weasel out of it. The 3 big questions on the federal employment side, they have to make religious accommodations, and that will be the main limitation on their conduct. The other will be certain other issues applicable on the federal side union contracts, other provisions that may be applicable. On the one that got most people, for federal employees, they don't even have the mandate out yet. He issued a similar kind of mandate of testing or vaccination several months ago for federal employees that never got implemented meaningfully. And so we'll wait to see what implements here. But a lot of federal employees who are worried should know that the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act gives them a robust right of a religious accommodation. That I would be surprised if the federal government tries to get around in the way the state governments of Maine, Washington, and California are currently trying to get around. And some private employers like Tyson Foods, it's probably not a coincidence that we now know that Tyson Foods was clearly working with the Biden administration, at least at some substantial level, because they were mentioned. They said, look at this great result we got from Tyson Foods. When they mandated it, they went from less than half to more than 3/4. I will be bringing suit against Tyson Foods because they've been wrongfully denying people their religious accommodation, wrongfully denying people their medical exemption for previous natural immunity from prior COVID infection, and also, in my view, discriminating against them under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that takes us to the question of this OSHA rule. And there's three major legal questions. One is, does Congress even have the constitutional power under the Interstate Commerce Clause to give this power to OSHA in the first place? And that really the Interstate Commerce Clause analysis is the same as the 10th Amendment analysis, because the 10th Amendment analysis is if Congress doesn't have the power, then that power is reserved to the states and local governments. So that'll be the first question, as to their constitutional scope of whether or not Congress even has this power. And the Obamacare case sort of looms in the background on this, because the court recognized that they could not mandate insurance coverage. They could, under the taxing power, tax someone for not having insurance, but they couldn't require everyone to have insurance. And there they made a comparable argument. They made a similar argument that was about, because of the insurance market was in interstate commerce, they could require things to make sure the insurance market worked effectively. They honestly had a better argument than they do here for mandating a vaccine across. And of course, as you noted, and as other people noted, not only have they previously said they did not have this constitutional power, they were busy retweeting and liking tweets that said this was just an end run around their constitutional problems.
It's fantastic. It was Klain, who's the White House
chief of staff,
retweets a tweet. Some people say it wasn't an endorsement. He might have been retweeting it because he disagreed with it. Who knows what he meant by it? But Gruller pulled up clip after clip after clip saying we're not going to do this. We don't have the authority to do it, and then they do it. And it strikes me, Robert, it sounds a lot like the Jacobson rationale, where they're saying we're not making you do it. If you don't, they'll pay a fine. Here they're saying it's not compelled vaccination. It's going to be compelled testing if in the absence of vaccination. And if anybody has never had the test, it's not pleasant. It's actually quite painful. I found it painful. And others have said it caused certain irritations where they stick that swab up into the nether regions of your brain. So the idea is it's not compelling vaccination, the rule. It's compelling weekly testing, but employers, for the cost, for the inconvenience, for the facilities, the ease of control, are going to say, just get vaccinated. And that's what it amounts to. That's the practicality, but not the constitutionality. So then I guess go on to the second point.
So even assuming Congress has that power, we run into the CDC case problem, which is, did Congress explicitly delegate this power to OSHA? Because it's not clear this was ever the intention of Congress to cover these kind of employee safety issues, even if they had the power under the Interstate Commerce Clause, which itself is seriously problematic. And if Biden had been smart, he would have tried to tie this into and limit this to interstate commerce, but he did not. He tied it to the size of employer, even if the employer is simply intrastate. So it runs into a problem there, because it's not clear Congress has given this kind of power to OSHA to use it in this manner. The third aspect is, does OSHA have the power to do this in implementing their rules? So the legal predicate for all of this is that this is an emergency action by OSHA. OSHA has the right to issue an emergency rule and circumvent the notice and comment period that is otherwise required for a rule or regulation that it passes on employers, if they establish two facts. First, they have to establish there is a grave danger to employees without this rule. And secondly, that the rule is necessary to meet that grave danger. And the legal analysis in court is much stricter than it is under traditional arbitrary and capricious standards of the Administrative Procedures Act. They have to produce, they're limited to what their statements are. So when they give their statements for their reasonings, they can't go outside of that. They're stuck with that. That's the limit. If they can't substantiate that, they're done. The second part is they have to show a substantial evidentiary record that there is a grave risk and that this is the necessary means to meet that risk that does not in and of itself create other risks.
The grave risk is where, I mean, I don't know what has been the traditional legal jurisprudential threshold for grave risk, because we know the statistics, even if we operate on like the most gravest of these stats for the most vulnerable group, you're like, if it's 97, 98%, is that a grave risk? If you aggregate for the people who are going to be the object of this vaccination policy, if it's 99 plus survival, I mean, is that the grave risk? How have the courts, if you know offhand, ever interpreted this particular criteria for this particular exception?
They've been very strict on OSHA. In fact, OSHA, in the first 10 years between the mid-'70s and early '80s that they applied this rule, they lost half a dozen cases on this rule. It was one of the highest success challenge rates and biggest failure rates of administrative regulatory action anywhere. So much so that they have not even tried to use this rule in almost 40 years. So they lost even in asbestos cases. And, you know, when you're losing in asbestos cases, you're really losing. And to give people an idea, I mean, there they documented, they did a substantial, I won't try to say the word epidemiological because I'll get it wrong, but those kind of studies and surveys, extensive, expansive statistical data that backed it up. And the court said that was insufficient because some part of it at least was speculative and it was not sufficiently substantial to justify the application of an emergency rule that couldn't await 6 months of notice and comment. And so I mean, in here, it's not like they could get it done in probably shorter time. They could probably go to the notice and comment period in a month or two, given the FDA managed to approve a vaccine in 3 months from the time of application. So they're expert. Just because traditionally it takes them longer, there's no reason why it couldn't be shorter here, because what they're really trying to short circuit is the notice and comment period. They want no citizen participation or citizen review. And that's the other problematic aspect of this sort of rush to issue a vaccine mandate on individuals. The other component is as to the grave risk, they're going to have to produce stats that even the FDA and CDC don't want to produce. So by historical metrics, they have to produce a stratified, individualized risk portfolio that says, here's how many people are going to die unless we issue this rule. And I'd like to see that, because we're now talking about employees. We're not talking about retired people with 3 comorbid diseases.
Who probably are vaccinated in any event and don't need this type of coercion to get vaccinated, or given their risk factors.
Or can't get vaccinated because of their health condition. So the vaccination mandate wouldn't help them. So you're now going to be looking at people in between the ages of 18 and 65 almost exclusively. I mean, there'll be some over 65, but not many in this workforce. They're supposed to study this workforce, look at their individualized risk. And not only that, the other important factor here is, in terms of meeting the necessity standard and assessing the graveness of the risk, you're looking at asymptomatic spread, not symptomatic spread. Because if someone is symptomatic, they already have the remedy already in place that they're supposed to self-quarantine. Almost every employer already has that rule in place. So they have to stay at home if they're sick. So, or for many, if they've even been exposed to someone who's sick, they have to self-quarantine. So you're talking about people who have not been exposed, who are showing no symptoms. So what's that calculation? My latest calculation is that's about 1 million to 1 risk that they definitely, and some people would say in court filings, in California, they've said there's no risk. So but let's say even it's on the high side, even Fauci has said the risk is very, very rare of asymptomatic spread occurring at all, least of all that it occur in a deadly way to an otherwise healthy population. That's problem one. Then problem two, of course, is going to be, how is this necessary? Because according to the latest big UK study, when it comes to the Delta variant, the vaccine doesn't dramatically reduce transmission risk. It reduces severity of symptoms, but it doesn't reduce transmission risk. And the only grounds for this is to reduce transmission risk.
And which ironically almost flips the script on who is at risk and who's the threat, because if you can transmit just as easily but don't have any symptoms, you don't even know that you could be potentially carrying it, it makes you actually the risk to the unvaccinated, which is the ultimate irony in all of this, is that if you're prone to show more symptoms, which would be your own decision and risk to take, you'll know when you're sick and you'll not go out when you're showing symptoms. Whereas if you get vaccinated, you could still transmit it maybe a little less easily, but you don't show symptoms. You don't even know when you have it to know not to go out. It's a double whammy actually in terms of exacerbating the problem.
The other thing they did, I think politically, it was a mistake, because I get Biden feels under pressure to change the topic from Afghanistan, where he's been busy bombing innocent families. And
we have to get to that also, Robert. People
Yes.
have questions about that, but we'll get there.
No doubt. And it probably wasn't a coincidence that the exact same day that story broke, that it was not ISIS people, but an innocent family, actually an aid worker that he killed with a drone bomb, is the same day he decided to come out with this dramatic story, hoping to change the headlines. And of course it did. But I don't know if it changed it in ways that they think it's going to be as helpful to them as they think. Like Trudeau in Canada, like Newsom in California, like Cuomo in New York, a lot of people assume that bought into the media hype on this, that this was very popular. Richard Barris, People's Pundit, has done extensive surveys, and 75 to 80% of people oppose any adverse consequences to people for not taking the vaccine. And not only that, he also shows from his survey, 3 to 4% of the country reports serious, significant adverse events from the vaccine, which would be the typical 10x ratio to VAERS, that historically the VAERS data understates injury rate by about a 10-fold ratio. It's been as high as 100-fold, but that was a Harvard FDA commissioned study that concluded that.
For people out there, I mean, what does a serious adverse reaction look like? I mean, a really sore arm or lasting nerve damage? Doesn't necessarily require hospitalization?
Richard Barris used the CDC's own definition of that. Okay. So he used the CDC's definition and said, has this happened to you? And he used how they define a serious injury. And basically it's disabling, something that has been very severe for you, that it's disabling, not death, obviously, because if you're dead, you can't answer the survey. The only time dead people get to vote is when it's the presidential election. So but
hashtag joke, YouTube overlords.
Yes, exactly.
Joke.
Yeah, completely. But so I think that, but what he did is he woke up a lot of people that frankly were asleep. A lot of people in the Republican Party were asleep on this. A lot of people, the so-called Conservative Party in Canada is still asleep on this.
They're not asleep. Now they're on board. Now the vaccine passport, they're full on board. I mean, it's crazy what happens when a government thinks a policy is popular, and especially when it allows them to grab more power. That's the win-win. When grabbing more power looks more popular, man, even the conservatives jump on that overnight. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly right. So, but I think you have over 20 states have announced they're going to oppose this and they're going to litigate against it, including Texas and Florida, the big ones. So there's going to be a lot of high power politically influential actors now going after vaccine mandates, which is, for those of us that have been opposing this for a while, is a great relief, because we were kind of out on a limb, without a lot of support. So Biden did us a big favor by putting this front and center. And then a lot of big businesses that, even businesses that were considering doing it, didn't like the way they understand the precedent that's being set here. They understand that, okay, before long, I no longer run my own business. The government runs my own business. And if I don't want the government to run my own business, I got to stop this precedent now, even if I was going to do a vaccine mandate myself, because it creates a much bigger blowback and much potential risk precedent-wise. As one person put it, if the government can do this, what can't they do?
Oh, No, I mean, that's once individuals lose control of their bodies in this, that you become a vessel, a receptacle of the state's dictates. I mean, you're not free anymore. Period. When you can be compelled, coerced under deprivation of civil rights to have something physically injected into your body, it's not free anymore. But Robert, has OSHA? Someone told me, I don't want to name names because I don't want to put them on a spot, that OSHA had been in fact used to require flu vaccines for healthcare workers once upon a time? I mean, had it ever operated in that field to your knowledge?
There have been those kind of requirements, but to my recollection, it wasn't OSHA that did it. I thought it was state agencies that typically did it. Sometimes it's Medicare and Medicaid, the Department of Health and Human Services that does it. But in those contexts, when they have tried a flu vaccine mandate, they've had to do a religious exception, or they've lost. They've also lost cases on grounds of that it violated the ADA, what they did. So so that's where and it's been much more limited and restricted. It's always only been in the healthcare context, been when there's been a real big bad flu outbreak, and there's been lots of rigorous exemptions and exceptions put in. So this is much broader than anything like that ever has been done. And before, Biden was trying to limit it to healthcare workers in the private, because there he had the most political leverage.
Well, yeah, and there you at the very least, like it or not, you have the biggest logical justification, like
yes.
where you're working with sick people, vulnerable people, and whatever. Okay, for the healthcare workers themselves, maybe it makes sense. So if you have the required exemptions, all the better. But now it's any business and private businesses. At first, I thought it was just federal employees, and then I realized it's private businesses of 100 employees and more, subjected to these requirements, these inspection rights, or these, the OSHA can come and enter and do whatever, and the fines, which are not insignificant. Jonathan Turley, in his blog about it, mentioned that he thought it strategically a big mistake for obvious reasons, but one of which was that apparently they could have tagged along through amicus to existing lawsuits. What existing lawsuits are there out there that they could have tagged along to that would have addressed this question in due course?
Well, I mean, there's about at least a dozen that I'm aware of, challenging vaccine mandates in a wide range of contexts, either the university context, state actor context, or private employer context. The LA Police Union filed suit, I believe, on Friday concerning the vaccine mandate there in LA. There's a San Francisco union suit. Apparently, they may settle it by allowing the firemen not to take the vaccine or giving them a broad exemption. Several state of Washington suits pending. Several New York suits pending. I have a suit, and I guess probably fair transition, against with Bobby Kennedy, Children's Health Defense, against the FDA for pretending that they have an approved available vaccine out there when their own admission is that it's not, in fact, widely available. So
we're going to get to that one, Robert, because that's another one. I need the details to be broken down, but.
So Turley could have been referencing that, because part of our grounds for challenging it is we're saying the injury is that people think they're mandating a fully approved vaccine when that fully approved vaccine is not available. And so the FDA should have to come clean with everybody, quit lying in its advertising, and admit that they don't actually have available yet the FDA fully approved vaccine. In the emergency use context, the word approved has a different legal meaning than it might in other contexts. So approval means full FDA biologic license, whereas authorization means emergency use authorization only.
And we're going to get into this in greater detail in a few minutes, because this is a separate lawsuit, and I have my theory about some of the distinctions, but we're going to get there.
Yeah.
So
but that may be what Turley was talking about.
Okay. And so Turley, by and large, thinks this is objectively as unconstitutional as the CDC declaring an eviction moratorium. The executive basically delegatis non potest delegare, that they're delegating to an institution power that they never had in the first place. So lawsuits will fly. It'll be declared unconstitutional, and
it should be. I mean, we'll see. Well, I mean, there's an ugly history of the federal judiciary cowering and acting like cowards when it comes to emergencies that the executive branch declares. So we're going to find out whether the judiciary is going to make our tripartite system of government work, or if it's utterly useless, as it has at times in crisis in the past.
And what was the other question I had about the vaccine mandates? So I think we've covered this.
And for everybody out there, get the actual policy. So there's a lot of people.
So practical advice. We do it every week, but do it again. And then the letter template that floats around our locals page.
Yes.
Hold on, take this off for the first of many.
Yeah,
Viva law.
VivaBarnesLaw.locals.com. Pinned at the top is an example of a letter you can send to an employee. It's not legal advice. You're free to do with it as you wish. You're free to edit, but no copyright asserted. You can borrow it, copy it, change it, whatever you want to do. And there's a lot of other great information there. I'm also breaking down all the different lawsuits and other legal information that gets into some of the medical detail we can't get into here. Robert Gruller pointed out how people were lying about Joe Rogan, and YouTube suspended him for a week. So for the great detail about all of these vaccine cases, particularly the medical and scientific information that YouTube doesn't like to be shared here, it will be at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
The politicization of everything we have witnessed in the past years stem from the left's overreaction to Trump, and in particular, the Billy Bush tape. Well, I think it started before that, but
it accelerated under Trump, but it's arguably really the big sort talks about it. The 2004 election was the real hardening of the culture war in America.
Sorry, and Scrog GWCW can't get Rumble Rants to work. Barnes, since USPS exempt, what about equal protection? This is one question.
It's not clear that they really are exempt. So here's the issue. Watch for the feds to play games on this. Watch for them to slow roll out their own mandate. So a lot of federal employees are really nervous, and I was like, just wait. 2 months ago, a lot of people were supposed to be getting tested or vaccine, and they never managed to roll out those policies because they understand more than anybody their legal risk. They understand a lot better than a lot of private employers their legal risk, than some local and state governments their legal risk. And so they're going to slow play it. And so that's why it looks like they may try to mandate it as well to U.S. Postal Service workers. Here's their problem. A lot of U.S. Postal Service workers are already at retirement age. There's a bunch that have no interest in taking this. On average, about 20 to 25% of the country has said, in Richard Barris's poll, which has been the most accurate by far, going more than half a decade now, the People's Pundit, you can find him at People's Pundit Daily, both on and People's Pundit on Locals, is that about a quarter of the country, at least a fifth, and usually a quarter of the country said they have no interest in taking this vaccine. Then people have a lot of reasons for that. A big one is some of them already had COVID, and so they don't see any upside. For many, they have religious objections based on the use of aborted fetal cells and the development or production of these vaccines.
And just stop there so that nobody gets confused about this. There's a distinction between the vaccine itself containing actual fetal particles, as opposed to the research having gone into it, having been done with. So people who have a religious objection or a moral objection, it's not necessarily to the vaccine itself containing this, because the doesn't, but it has been used in the research and development of which people take objection to.
Exactly. I mean, and there's a lot of people even people who are pro-choice. Many of them have religious problems with actually using aborted fetal cells in scientific experimentation of any kind, and don't want to be part of that. And what's sad and disturbing is not only state governments, but also Tyson Foods not honoring those religious objections. They're trying to make employers not only being able to control your body, but to decide for you what is a legitimate religious belief. They're trying to become your pastor and your priest. I mean, they're really trying to bring back Inquisition era kind of style of power. And so I think that's why all of that is deeply problematic. I think it violates Title VII. We'll get into a little bit later the horrendous conduct of Trader Joe's in a comparable context.
And someone had asked in a chat, what about atheists? Are we second-class religious citizens because we might have beliefs that are objections, call them moral objections, that are not standard religious objections? It's a legitimate point. Like, you don't have to be Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu to have a religious objection. You can have a deep moral objection and be atheist or agnostic. But Robert, someone had said, I don't know if it's true, and I'd like to verify with you that apparently Congress was exempt from the mandate, or would be exempt from the mandate.
They would have to be, because the executive branch has no authority over either the legislative or judicial branch. So the executive branch cannot mandate this for any member of Congress or their staff, and cannot mandate this for any member of the judiciary or their staff. And so that's why there's different set of rules. It's interesting where they recognize their limits. They recognize their limits as to other branches of power. They're not recognizing their limits as to, some other areas where a lot of us think there are such limits.
Amazing here. And postal workers also needed by Dems for 2022, 2024. Well, that was actually the joke I was going to make. It's like you have AOC in 2020 talking about how to save the postal workers, send out a letter, and now they're basically going to push them into early retirement through their policies.
Yeah.
It's
and the problem for them is apparently some internal estimates from what I heard is that up to 20% of postal workers may choose early retirement rather than get the vaccine. The problem for them is that level, they're already running thin. Amazon depends almost entirely on the postal service to be able to deliver their products on a timely manner. So it would not be just a huge problem with the mail. It'd be a problem with companies like Amazon wouldn't be able to function. So it would be a massive, massive problem. They will probably try to avoid by delaying ever rolling it out for them. But it appears they won't be as exempt as they were led to believe initially. I think they led them to believe that, so there would not be massive resignations.
Yeah, and we're having the same problem in Canada now. You know, our healthcare system is already understaffed, and they're rolling out a vaccine passport that will apply to healthcare workers of all functions.
Well, and that speaks to another irony. The excuse Biden used for mandating on federal contractors, and by the way, the language appears to be new contracts, not existing contracts, because there would be issues with that. But putting that aside, is that it will make procurement go smoother and more efficient to mandate this. It's like there's no factual basis for that. In fact, the evidence is just the opposite. I mean, as a New York hospital found out, a bunch of nurses, maternal nurses, quit rather than take the vaccine. And now they won't even be in a position to be able to deliver babies there over the next several weeks. So this doesn't make things smoother. It's not like there's a bunch of people not going to work because other people are not vaccinated. That's not happening. And it's nor are there is there any evidence that there's tons of people getting sick because of unvaccinated people at work? There's not evidence of either one, but OSHA is going to have to produce evidence of both, or it's not going to be able to meet even that low level, that first level of test of whether or not it's even a grave risk that requires this as a necessary tool.
All right. So, I mean, I guess it's going to be a matter of time before the lawsuits get filed, if they haven't already been filed against this.
They're waiting for the actual rules. The actual rules haven't been issued yet.
All right. Excellent. How long are we?
But the Daily Wire said they're going to sue. Turning Point with Charlie Kirk said they're going to sue. And a bunch of state attorney generals said they're going to sue. So, and we're putting together an informal coalition with Children's Health Defense, the National Civil Liberties Union, I think it's called, replacing the ACLU. Some other groups that are the Rutherford Institute, the Pacific Institute. The other thing was this woke up a lot of people. There were some people in Washington sitting on their hands who weren't going to do anything about this. And once Biden mandated it, they suddenly woke up. And there were some, big institutional actors and some big donors on the sort of the big corporate think tank side that woke up and realized, oh, you know what? This is a serious problem for us running our business down the road. Is Joe Biden going to be our CEO moving forward? And would anybody make Joe Biden their CEO? I mean, it's sad enough he's president, but come on, no private company would put a dementia candidate in charge.
They made him. What is the word? What's the word? Commander in chief. So yes. That's what CEO is. CEO is nothing by comparison. All right, that's amazing. Someone said if they made Congress exempt, shouldn't they make their constituents exempt? I said don't expect consistency in any of this.
Yes, indeed.
One thing I love, everyone hates the states because it's a litigious society. You fall down someone's cracked steps and you sue for $10 million. This is where I love it. In Quebec, we rolled out the vaccine passport. I'm searching for any organization with the legal interest to file a lawsuit. I'm not seeing very many. I'm going to find something. But the states, vigorous defense of rights, and especially the God-given constitutional rights, they take them a little more seriously, and they are still, for despite all their other foibles, a beacon of light for the rest of the world and an influence of how people should defend their rights.